Vincent, thanks for joining me today. We're here to talk about your journey in live experiences, escape rooms, things like that. So maybe we can start off on just you giving a brief background on who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
All right. My name is Vincent Kovar. I've been a gamer since, the old days. I always tell people that I made my first game. It was one of those text-based adventures based on, H.P. Lovecraft's The Dream Quest for Unknown Kadath. I was 10,
Amazing.
so it was considered pretty weird. But it was on a VIC-20, which has 5K. They're not in existence anymore. I think my shoelaces have more K. But I was very proud because when you died, it would pixelate the screen with those giant pixels and play the first few bars of Chopin's Funeral March. And so I really got into this idea about, yeah, it was pretty weird, uh, about making interactive multimedia experiences. It's like board games. I love board games, but they're not really multimedia. Some of the early video games, console video games, and then they were still kind of limited in that they weren't as immersive. And then I discovered escape rooms and simultaneously also those murder mysteries in a box, which I'm a great fan of, and can never find enough people to play with me because I'm such a nerd for them. And then those subscription boxes that, they send you every month.
Yeah.
And I really loved the idea. What I found was kind of exciting about solving a puzzle and then sending your answer to an online website, and then it would send you something back.
Mm.
And it's become easier and easier to do this. There's all sorts of tools, but I still wanted to get it more immersive even still. And I have a friend who has a performance based / tea house about an hour and a half north of Seattle. Uh, so he's an amazing designer, fantastically visual, hugely overworked. And he's like, we should do this walking tour, scavenger hunt, escape room thing in the town. And so rather than just in his space, we decided we would use I think the play space was 3 blocks wide and 6 blocks long in this historic section of a small town. Because we were looking for a lot of things that don't move, like statues and stuff.
Hmm.
So we don't have to we didn't have to update the clues. But also we wanted stuff that wasn't on Google Maps. The
Mm.
street view. So we went around, spent a lot of time just on street view. And we found things like 2 public clocks that don't tell the same time. And when you see them on Google Maps, it's obviously not animated, it's not live. So you actually have to go there to do it. So the idea was we see people, on their phones. They're doing this all day long. And the idea was you would have to look at the real world around you. So it was trying to make it an escape room inside out. The whole place there's no walls. You have to kind of look around, but also where you're encouraged to use your phone. And then I created I don't know if this will show up in a book that goes with it. So it's called Through the Keyhole. It opens up with should know that's right off. There's the maps of the small town. They're actual historic maps. And I chose maps that are not current. So these
Mm.
are at least 80 years old.
Okay.
100 and stuff. So some of the buildings aren't there. Then there's word scrambles. There's art and names of flowers. And then there's just a bunch of QR codes everywhere. So there's QR codes in the book. So you'll solve a puzzle, use your phone to go to. I just built little websites on GitHub. They're very primitive, but type in your answer and then it will give you the next clue. And what I got excited about that part is I could do it with music. I did some little voiceovers, not me. I used AI, but and actor friends and stuff just, you know, telling the next clue. The idea is that, kind of go to the place and then certain shops who elected to participate would put a QR code in their window in a poster or some kind of design that would be affiliated with, we had this rabbit with antlers. So where you saw the rabbit with antlers, there was the thing. like you could scan or somehow participate in. And we couldn't put them everywhere, so it was only participating stores. And the idea is that and it's all broken up. All these, so the pieces in the book, if you have the book, you can't make it all the way through the puzzle. If you see the codes on the street and you scan them, it only takes you like one clue forward. And so you have to have all three pieces, the third piece being the actual town itself and the online system and then the book to make it through. One of the things I did not think of when I was being a happy little genius, I thought, is every time you add an element, it increases the complexity of your puzzle exponentially. My puzzle is also actually, after walking through it, it's about 8 hours long. So there was another issue. And we initially wanted it to be like leisurely versus escape rooms being timed. And so that people would go into the breweries, the cafes, the bakeries, and have snacks and things. And they could play at any time. And so the route is along shops that were intended to be open and shopped at. So, and there's breaks built in. It'll play a little music and go, isn't now a good time for a break? And you would hopefully be standing in front of an affiliated brewery or something. We initially wanted, like, you go in and place a special order and they would pull out, the thing that this requires the shops be open, that it to be stocked, that the employees know what the heck you're talking about, when you come in. It was getting pretty complex. So we scaled back on that. The other level of complexity was just by having mobile optimized websites, printing, book layout, graphic design, getting it printed and shipped, logistical layers, which escape room designers know that at least they're in one spot.
Yeah.
And then you have marketing and everything on top of it. And then, of course, I, being insane, decided that I would make some of the web pages little mini puzzles or mini games. So you have a slider game. It's a picture of a building that is an antique picture. So you're standing in front of the real building and you're trying to solve this puzzle to figure out what words are missing from the sign. That was a whole nother level of complexity that I did not anticipate. And then you also have people who just get stuck. And of course, I created shortcuts. So in theory, you could call and go, I'm stuck, help. And it'd be like, okay, click the icon 3 times.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was between the community relations of getting all the businesses in and the production and the websites. And then some of the, I also have this clever idea of making some of the QR codes half. So half is in the book, half is on site. Post it together and then do a phone. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do VR and have a pop-up video?
Big ideas is what I'm hearing. You have a lot of big ideas.
Mostly runnable. The shops participating, but you could actually take, aside from it being clunky, GitHub websites, and the book does work. Even the ink is not always dark enough on some of the QR codes when you stretch them and they don't scan.
Interesting.
I also put in GPS games, so it would lead you to certain things. You don't do that. That's
so I think it's really interesting. I know we've tried to schedule this meeting a couple times, but today I feel like even where we started this conversation, like I'm rereading Ready Player One right now, and I'm literally in the chapter 22, where he's playing a text-based game. Like he's playing essentially the original Zork. And like, even just being like, I feel like this was just kind of like, this is just how it had to be to have this conversation and be in the mindset of where you are coming from in this, that I think is really, for me, just feels very right. I think like a lot of the things, I took a bunch of notes while you were kind of talking, and I do have some questions about how the idea of this was to be run. So you have the book, you've got the location, you've got the puzzles and QR codes around town. Was the intention behind the puzzle to bring people to this town as sort of like a travel destination to see this thing and experience the town in a way that maybe gave them more like self-guided tour of the town? Or is it also to have like a real-time kind of guide? You mentioned 8 hours long, so I imagine that's a long time for a guide to be, all right, we're gonna look at this next building. So how did that origin kind of start?
The very first, we've been working on this for about 3 years. Don't schedule yourself too little time. It takes a long time. The first iteration was we were going to have it during a beer festival. So there'd be people in the crowd. We were going to have them wear little pins, production, like suddenly the cost starts going up about where do we get these little pins, and we have to have them shipped and made, and who's going to design the pins. And we were going to have live performers. You were going to go to the photo booth and the spirit would show up behind you if you had the little pin. And all of a sudden, like the number of actors, the prices just, everything went way up, and and the failure points. And then you have to have at least, I don't know, 5 producers.
Yeah.
Much like in an escape room, you have to have somebody there. It can't run itself.
Yeah.
And so the original thought was to scale it down into something that was self-sustainable, but also the book would act as the ticket. So you could buy the book, it would be sent to you, or you could go to a place and there'd be a launch event. We were going to have like an expedition tea. But the idea was you could do it at any time, and you just have to start in the right place. So it started out much more immersive, much more interactive, based on, I think there's various games you can go to in various towns where they have corporate scavenger hunts and they have live actors do stuff. The level of complexity was just my background's in theater, and I was like, oh, we can do this. I couldn't do it. So it was really scaling back. And even the 3-hour portion or the 8-hour portion, the subsequent plan, which I just haven't summoned up the energy, is to split it into 3 paths so that if a lot of people start at the same time, they'll go 3 different directions for the first clue versus follow each other around. Also makes it much shorter. But then you have to have enough clues in each spot. They have to be interactive enough. But the real plan was to get people to come to this town, and rather than just going on a historical walking tour, to have it be a puzzle. So to find the monument to the Spanish Civil War, there's a cannon in front of the courthouse. It's a clue. And then there's like a engraven memorial, and you have to get the order of the things right. And there's somebody's monument, a veteran's monument, and then doing a word puzzle or 3 down, 4 across, and that kind of thing. So immovable objects, but they really got them to experience the place versus just looking at it.
Yeah. And one thing that's kind of interesting about something that, rather than being contained in a physical space, is much more open, you're encompassing a whole town basically, is there's obviously the historic angle. You can kind of look around and explore the town as an angle. But I think the idea of being able to craft stories, like you read books where it's about a town and there's things happening all over the town, and it gives you sort of some creative freedom to now take those same historical elements and maybe weave them into a story that's more fictional, more, like you said, immersive, and gets you kind of on it's more of like living out a book, or something like that, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's I talk to a lot of people about how when you own an escape room, once people have played all your rooms, their customers are, like, until you build another room or change a room or whatever, you kind of lost that customer. But with a space of that size in that town, it's really just limitless in terms of, what stories you can be able to create around that. Is that like one of the future plans maybe that you kind of had been thinking about?
Yeah, we in my sort of day life, I'm in marketing, and so I'm always thinking about how to sell things. And one of the options was really like, as they're wandering around, they're going to get exposed to all these businesses, and even though they might not go to that cafe today, they might see it and go, "Oh, I want to go back there tomorrow." So it gives them a richer experience of the place without being salesy. And then also it like we found a bunch of the state has some lovely historical society websites and what happened in that spot. And we're only getting one clue out of that particular spot, but there's a richer story there. And then we
Mm.
layer a fictional story on top about magic rabbits chasing each other through the town. I even added in some just absolutely silly, they have no effect on the game, hinted that by bouncing your phone, you would get different results. And so that you were supposed to play hopscotch down a section of the sidewalk or, stop here and dance or something. And maybe people will, maybe they won't, but physically interacting with the space in a non-destructive way. One of the things I think escape room creators always have to worry about is you get the people who are like, what's behind this? And they, rip the thing off the thing.
Yes.
And they open the thing that's not supposed to be opened because it's not designed to be. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of thought that went into how to keep people from tearing apart the town.
Yes.
And so none of the clues require anything be opened or moved. That's what we drew back from the restaurants and ordering stuff in the restaurants, because the only thing you write on is the book. The only thing you interact with is your phone. And then you just look at other stuff.
Yeah.
But it requires, like, there's some, walking around a corner or looking down an alley or going to some historic spots. And this town is known for flooding. So, like, the flood monuments are part of it. And where did the flood
Mhm.
go? How high was it? And even like the years of the flood, there's some that are missing, and you have to go on a website and find the website and then figure out which years are missing, and you plug in those numbers.
Mhm.
It takes you off. So yeah, it was really to try to be as interactive as possible in a non-destructive, low-risk, non-liability.
Yeah. Was there any sort of like resetting of the environment? Like, was there any people who had to do things when people were going out to go on it? Or was it fully self-sustaining?
It was this iteration anyway was fully self-sustaining. There's no resets. They started out a very long time ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. There are some people who go around to small towns and they do murder mysteries where you go to shops and you get a little slip of paper that's a clue, but those have
Yeah.
to be reset. And we really wanted something totally self-sustaining that you could play at any hour, which pretty much works.
Yeah.
And it also was historic. So there's buildings that don't exist anymore. They've been built
Mm.
over. And so finding the lost building becomes part of the story, but you obviously don't have to tear down a building to find the clue.
Yeah. You're not scraping off paint or anything.
Yeah, there's nothing like that. We
Yeah.
thought about doing some like ultraviolet paint, and other than the QR codes in shop windows, there's nothing. And they're in the window, so you don't have to go into the store.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially as I imagine most groups are probably family size. Like it's a unit of people who are already friendly together. They bought a book and they want to go explore. You're not looking at like 50 people across multiple groups, like running around town. It's a different kind of a vibe. So I think that's more sustainable. Like you said, you talked about the 3 different pathways that people could kind of start with or whatever. Does that mean your book is broken up into kind of sections of like, could you take the book and maybe do like, 3 parts of it or something, and then there like another day you came back and did the other parts? Or how was the idea for behind that?
The plan was to break it into 3 books. A lot of the layout, printing, graphic design gets heavier, but to do it in 3 books, so you would have like ABC or maybe
Okay.
coded or what have you. And they all start in the same spot, but then they take you on different paths. And if you play all 3, you get a better feel of the town, but each one of the clues is original enough. I tried to break them out into X number of historic clues. These are cryptography. These are just reading.
Mm,
There's something more physical. So there's a decent variety. I guess you could do like the cryptographic path or the one, but I just
yeah.
preferred the mix myself.
Yeah, I think the mix is nice because it does give that variety in what you're doing. Like, especially if you're going to explore the kids or explore the town with your kids or whatever, doing the same kind of puzzle over and over. Like I know, taking our kids around when they were younger was just like, what's new, what's fresh. It makes it more enjoyable kind of for everybody. So I think that path kind of makes sense. And I think like the idea of maybe exploring certain stories in each one of those books sounds really, really neat to be able to, again, like from a tourism perspective, to be able to be like, I really want to learn about the old buildings, or I'm really interested in flood specifically, having sort of thematic elements like that to explore would be kind of cool.
And I tried to break it down so that like mixed age levels, mixed skill levels, everybody kind of has a different, I've gotten into some of these, puzzles in a box where there's like 3 PhDs and, multi executive professionals in different tech things. And it took us forever to go through this like thing because we are just all kind of the same mindset. And, then we brought my friend's wife, who's a preschool teacher, and suddenly she was just like cracking these things open. And we were like, oh man. So really trying to mix, the skill level, not the skill level, but the skill style.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's something that escape rooms share, right? Like when I talk to people, they often talk about different ways to approach a problem. Some people are very like, I want to be the project manager of my group or something like maybe that organizational structure is what they bring to it. But then there's some people who are just like, I'm very math inclined or I really like puzzling. So they get really, in the weeds on some things. But like you also have people who are just like explorers where they just see things and then share things and communicate. I really like the idea that, you talked about like everybody's kind of like walking around with their phones in front of their face and everything. I feel like the way you're having people discover sort of in real life, for lack of a better word, is really fresh, like you're not, when you're in an escape room, oftentimes your phone is stripped from you. You're forced to like look at things, but this feels much more voluntary to be like, hey, we're looking at this book, but then we're trying to explore and like find things around our environment, which I really like the subtlety of that. I think it's less, put your phone away and more like enjoy the environment, you know?
yeah, I designed it for 3 to 5 players per team. And I chose 3, which is always an odd game number, but because one could really kind of manage the book. The person with the best phone can, do their phone activities, and then the one who has no interest in either can just be the spotter. And like kids are really good for this. It's like we're looking for,
Yep.
thing. It's red. It's up high, and you don't have to be almost any age. You can be like, I can look up high and find a red thing.
Yeah. Yeah, kids are taught I Spy like from a very young age, right? So you're right, that definitely lends itself to those sort of exploratory things, and I think is really cool. So you mentioned board games much earlier, and sort of how you and maybe some of the mail-in games that you have as well. And so my first experience with sort of the at-home puzzle box type thing and like a web-based component was the Emerald Flame. I think that's what it's called. But it's a game where there's a series of groups, and then once you've solved the first set of puzzles, you enter in whatever your puzzle is online, and you get, like you said, you get that feedback, that instant feedback from the system, like no, you're off, or okay, now here's the next set of things to get started. Can you obviously, like, from a operational standpoint, that took some programming or development from your side of things. What types of tools are you using to build those kinds of things? Like, is it AI kind of vibe coding sort of things, or is it just quick and dirty HTML pages, or how's that working?
I started HTML back when it was 0.94, and then there was a big gap. And so my skills are really good at things that are almost outdated and nobody uses. And so a lot of the early web pages, in the order they're in, you can actually tell my skill levels changing as I wrote them.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end, it's more vibe coding, or I would go on. There's all those websites that will have like downloadable puzzles or widgets or things like that. And so I would often just use those and then change the background colors and that sort of thing to be on brand. So it's a mix of hand coding, just copying off of public websites, and then vibe coding, which has been, I'm not sure vibe coding saved me a lot of time. It's probably better now, but when I first started doing it, it was a couple of years ago, and vibe coding wasn't quite good yet. And so I lot of time going, no. And I'd have to upload it to GitHub and then check it and then go back and start over. And it was also when AI was just giving you the same code over and over and telling you it had made changes. It was lying. And I didn't know
Yeah.
that. There was some swearing involved. Lots of hours to get just like one or two. I mean, they're just one page, each one, maybe two. I started getting fancy where you enter the code and then it pops up with a, you know, code. I'm like, yeah, but I have to check, is it work on Apple? Does it work on,
Yes.
so
So
simple, better.
yeah, so you mentioned kind of in your intro that you were very interested in multimedia, growing up and even, older. Did you have like so building your first actually it's funny when you said you built your for a 5K. Like I remember the reason I laughed when you said you had it play that song is because I remember being in high school and being in like the computer class or whatever, and I remember programming in BASIC, like having like the music, like play notes and stuff. And I thought it was so funny. But the day that everybody finished their projects was probably the most annoying day for the teacher because everyone's, audio was like, like all the, all the just different audio things was super funny. And it made me remember that. But did you, besides, sort of crafting games like text-based games or anything like that, were there some technologies you sort of worked through as you were, growing your career and skills that you found useful in building this puzzle system for yourself?
Definitely. I got brought on to Adobe for a brief period to help them convert from Creative Suite to Creative Cloud when the cloud was, everybody just waved their hand, said the cloud.
Yes.
And my particular set of tools that I was given to help transition was the production suite. And I had been an actor and been in films and needed the job. And so I told them, of course, I know video production, and then went and learned video production the weekend before I started.
Sure.
Which, yeah, there's a bunch of great tutorials on YouTube. And that's really all I needed to get started. And it's made me, I'm a big fan of like the little mini films, trailers. And so there is one of the clues I have is a mini movie. And I just used public domain. This was before AI could make video,
Sure.
but and I really wanted it to be old classical black and white films and strung together little clips, put some music behind it, old vaudeville because there's a historic theater that had been a vaudeville house and turned to a theater. So that's the clue you get there is this little movie. And it's just symbols. You have to go find the symbols and what those symbols mean and how they're encoded. It creates, that's the final puzzle, I think, or pretty close because it's the most difficult. But,
Yeah.
so that kind of multimedia was really helpful. Some of the, I don't know, I'm a big fan of history. And so like the lost language of flowers kind of comes into play,
Mm.
different cryptography techniques from history. Um, yeah, everybody takes some language in school. And so I looked at the demographics of this town, and it's like 30% Spanish speakers or spoken in the home. And so I added some Spanish clues and gave a link to Google Translate. And I'm like, go figure it out.
Yeah.
Um,
That's awesome. I mean, I kind of going back to the tourism piece being sort of a draw to people to come to that area. It is that something where you worked generally like you mentioned you worked with the different shops and things like that, but does that town have like a tourism part of the city? Like is like did you work with them on sort of formulating the plan for this thing?
we intended to, it was one of those things that kind of the more bureaucratic elements, um, a lot of the production stuff got kind of dropped by the wayside just because
Mm.
there wasn't enough bandwidth for I don't know how many 100 hours I spent just building the puzzles and then going through and working with, I met the shops, we went and visited them. There is a tourism bureau and they also have a giant tulip festival, but the festival office wasn't open when I was there. So there was a lot of those missing gaps that kind of need to be, and it's usually best to do those off season for whatever it is because during their season they're just too busy.
Yeah. So I gather that this isn't a town that you live in or necessarily like right in or near. So that poses some probably other logistical challenges for putting this kind of a puzzle together.
Yeah, I did. It's about an hour and a half drive from me. And so driving up and back multiple times was just becoming also that's a point of friction because you can only really do it on the weekends and it kind of ends up consuming a lot of life. And you feel really dumb every time you have to go back for something. Even though I took a million pictures and video and Google Street Maps, but then I'm like, I don't know what that clock. I, I
It's
forget.
like Home Depot. Whenever you're doing a project at home, you always have to go back twice, even though you planned it out ahead of time.
Yeah, very similar. And then just kind of coordinating with all the different moving pieces. Is that business still there? Are they still interested? Did they have a change of staff? Um,
So yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of the question. I guess that I'm trying to think about is logistically, the book does help it stand alone, but without being there frequently or having access to the town, to update your things like that. That seems like a logistical challenge. Is that part of what ended up kind of making this not really like launch as you wanted it to?
yeah, that was a huge portion. And I spent so much time on the puzzle and the production stuff and creating QR codes and being super clever. A lot of it was, clever for its own sake and not really producing the ROI that is really necessary. When it came to a lot of logistical production pieces, even budgets, figure out how much the books cost and which printers. And, um, if you do have a launch event, where are you going to get those baked goods? And,
Mm,
all those little like logistical things become really difficult when it is an hour and a half away, even with phone and video.
yeah.
If I were to do another one, uh, I would probably start with I live next to 190 wineries, I think.
Wow.
Um, Woodinville it's like this winery center for some reason. Um,
Wow.
and there's more all the time, and they're always looking for ways to bring people in.
Mm.
Um, but then, of course, you have to make it would be, over 21 and you have to make sure people are driving. And
Yeah. And it seems like, so I guess taking that approach, you've laid this idea on a town, that has some historic value, all those kinds of things, which I think is fascinating. Like I think the idea of that part, is a great way. Like my family would definitely travel if we had like a puzzle book like that to a town, like I think more towns should have that in general. But I feel like businesses could have something like that too. Like you said, I mean, being that there's wineries near you, that makes sense. But I think that there's something to be said about a way to tell your story, and about a way for people to connect with that story. I mean, I think maybe from a small business perspective, it's too much effort, but someone that's been in business for hundreds of years in the country, like there's a lot of history there, that you can tap into and get people excited about. Is that something, you mentioned wineries, but is that something that like from your marketing background, you've kind of played with the idea of like, how could we take the same idea and apply it to business?
there's a lot of small towns, especially that are doing like mini film festivals, or there's a number of them around the country that are doing like immersive murder mysteries where all the townspeople are actually, actors in
Oh, that's awesome.
the drum up business. And to bring people there, it does circle you back to logistics things. Like this particular town doesn't have hotels anymore that have been converted into apartments, which makes there is a hotel a ways away at a
Yeah.
casino. We were trying to like do a deal and then get shuttles. And so
Mm,
yeah, you definitely have to look at a lot of logistical things once you break open the walls of an escape room. Um,
yeah.
I mean, you
Interesting.
have to worry about parking and can people get there? And
Yeah. Well, and I imagine, kind of another thing that I talk about with people is pricing. You're selling a book effectively to be the ticket, like you said. So, you have to figure out to price the book, but then you've also got, all those other components that are in it. Like, does that make it mean, or for you, is that like uh, comparing it to other tourism books, is this a value add experience that you're as more of a premium ticket item? Is this like, we just want people in, so we're covering our costs plus a little bit, or how do you approach the pricing?
Pricing is another one of my day job functions. I really have to shift modes sometimes because like making puzzles and pricing it is a puzzle, but it's just a very different kind of puzzle. We started out with a price that we just thought was reasonable that people would want to pay. And we're kind of reverse engineering what needs to happen. The pricing changes pretty radically.
Yeah.
We're trying to keep it as low as possible to be as accessible. And then you're like, oh yeah, we do have to have some profit.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get paid for this eventually. Something, for hundreds of and so will it be like, if we do low pricing, will it be everybody gets a little slice along the way, or what payments have to be front ended? So a lot of budgeting that went in and pricing, and did help with the creativity sometimes, because I would try to find like websites that already exist without me, that don't have to be hosted, that some historic society that are likely to be there for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And that's things like that. But yeah, it was a big thing, and also trying to figure out like the size of teams and then pricing, because we're sort of assuming that people will buy as few books as possible.
Well, I imagine you can, if you were to go the full path of building the 3 books, you could do an individual versus a bulk price, or something like that as well.
Yeah, we're gonna have it like if you buy it at a live event where you're getting tea and other things, that would be a different price, and I had to figure out like what is the margin on like in a restaurant, and how low can we make that for this other, and can we convince that bakery to give us like scones at half price?
Yeah, there's a lot of logistics in there.
So that was a big challenge. I think we got it down to, I was estimating between $35 and $40 a piece per person.
Okay. Yeah. Seems totally reasonable, from a price perspective. Again, like, I think there's, when I think about, I'm in tech also, so I'm a web developer, but when I think in terms of like books or classes or things that I buy for my profession, a lot of times those come with additional sources that are available online. And I expect that those books are maybe a little more expensive, because it's not really just the book that has been typeset and printed and published and, all those things. It's all those extra resources that you get. And I feel like in this case too, with yours, it's more than just the book. The book is just the gateway. There's so much more that you're building outside of that, that's, additional value. And, obviously all the photos and the time that you're putting into that, like 3 years, is a lot of investment of time, but the value also, like you said, it's an 8-hour long thing to go through and do every single thing, probably roughly that. Like that's a pretty incredible return on $30, if you break that down. Again, feels there's probably travel involved, there's probably other costs that are involved, which you're being aware of, which is great. But I feel like I said, I feel like the value for that return is pretty high.
Yeah, we were going to try to get the time down, split into three options, because even 3 hours, 8 hours is just a little long to be wandering around.
Sure.
We really did want it to be to give people a chance not only to build in breaks, but really give people a chance to interact. Like, maybe you feel like breakfast now. Take breakfast. There's no rush. The game will still be here. There's not a timer.
Yeah.
I think there was a couple things with timers, but they were very like short. You could start over. So there was no, you knew time. You're going to have 60 seconds to complete this task, and then you start over or something.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned something while we were talking, which is having to shift the way you're thinking about things in your job. How do you think either this process or, really it sounds like throughout your childhood, and the things that you enjoy on the side, like it's built up this sort of deep thinking ability of your own brain. Like how do you think this has all impacted how you approach work, how you approach, the varying responsibilities you have there and different things like that?
It's a huge impact. I always say, like, now that we have AI as part of our daily life, if you really study AI, what you put in that model determines what that AI can do. And so I always tell people, just think of your own brain as an AI model, I guess,
Mm,
just an intelligent model, and really think about what you need to put in your brain and what you put in your brain that may create unknown and possibly wonderful outcomes. Like, I told you I have a background in theater, and that has a huge influence on how I design games. Whether it be board games or word game, anything, because you start thinking about pacing and does that voice sound authentic, and is there an emotional compelling, uh, compliment in there, and are there stakes? Is there a motivation? And I would, the joke is if you want something done, give it to a theater kid because they can, build a world out of duct tape, which is very true. You learn to, like, a lot of those things you learn to create out of budgets of, whatever you found in your couch cushions, and
yeah.
as much creativity. And AI has been wonderful in terms of when you run into an obstacle that is just outside when I run into an obstacle that's outside my skill set. Like, I'm a terrible graphic designer.
Mm,
And then, that forces you to confront some philosophical and ethical uses of AI. So I'm like, okay, I'm only going to use things that are in the public domain,
mm,
or photos that cannot exist in real life, so that I'm not unemploying an artist somewhere or using somebody's work.
yeah.
Um, and so, all of my stuff was based on public domain art, very narrowly interpreted. And there's still some ethical questions, along a lot of people, but just even that process of thinking about it, what
Yeah.
does it mean? What are the implications of doing this? Like I said, on the little filmette, I used public domain video that was all silent films from, like, teens and 20s.
Yeah.
Um, and it created, I think, a fun flavor to the output
Mhm.
that I wouldn't get with AI.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned being a theater kid, and I come across that theme, I think, in a lot of escape rooms that I talk to. I think there are a lot of escape room either game masters that are, coming up that make great game masters because of their theater background. Even if there's no actors in the rooms, I think just selling the theme of where they are, whether it's the voice when they're talking and giving hints, all that kind of stuff. And I think you're the first person that I talked to that's really talked about, like, why, like a reason why. Like, I get the acting and the theme selling, all that kind of stuff. That, I think that, like, makes perfect sense. But I think the idea of putting on a production in theater, in high school or whatever, college, like, you're right. There's a scrappiness about, kids who are theater kids who are like, we got to have a make it work moment. Like, what do I got around me that I can make this thing happen? And I have that just from, like, a tinkering perspective. I wasn't in theater, but I like building and fiddling with things. And so I think that's where I get it on my side. But I didn't really put that together about theater as being part of the production. It's not just standing on stage and acting and things like that. It's really the entire production, building sets, all that kind of stuff that really does set that entire vibe of the show, whatever it is. My son's actually in theater, and they did a version of a play this last year, but it was like in basically like a steampunk style, which wasn't the style of the original play. But I think I really, looking back on that now, I'm connecting that to kind of what you're talking about, of being just like, here's what we have available. Let's make it work in this setting, and maybe we'll change up a bit of the play to make it fit that theme. I think that's really cool, and I think that gives me way more insight about, why people who are in theater probably gravitate towards escape rooms and puzzles and things like that in general.
It also makes you very audience focused. Works a lot in games, everything from, like, Dungeons and Dragons to video game companies. And you can tell when somebody has designed something for themselves versus designing it for the players. And one of the thing that loops back to either live testing a game or putting on a live play is the audience is right there. If you're the only person who thinks that's funny, nobody is laughing. And that's a really interesting moment when you're looking at a whole crowd of people who are like not laughing, or they laugh somewhere totally unexpected. You're like, I had no idea that was funny.
Yeah.
And so it makes you very audience focused, but also kind of introspective about why you enjoy certain things. Like I'm not a terribly good escape room player or even like these box mysteries because I really just want to tear them apart and see how they're built. The actual playing is, so what I found is that I'm really good as the spotter. So we have the puzzles, be like, okay, that's a Caesar cipher. I have no interest in solving it. I already know. And they're like, wait, don't you want to know what the clue is? And I'm like, somebody else will figure it out. Um, and,
Yeah.
but there are people who don't want to, like, once they have that solved, and that can be really fun. It makes you think about how people learn, how people interact with the space, with life. But there was a sound clue on one of the games I was playing, and it tapped out a number of things. And we were just supposed to count the beeps. And we were like, wait, we have to replay it. And a friend of mine who's like counting was like 9. We were like, oh. And so like suddenly he was not feeling engaged. And now he's like, you guys not, this is super easy. And like all the math puzzles then went to him and he's just like, you know, ripping.
Yeah.
And so that was really it's a way to get everybody involved. And that makes you very thoughtful when you have that immediate experience of seeing who's bored, who's not engaged. And then when they get excited and what makes them light up.
Yeah. I think that's super true. We watch all of my son's plays, and every night the audience is so different. Like you have some that like every beat that's like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. Or, the sad moments, everyone's like dead silent, in that. And you're right. You have to adapt. It is like a conversation almost as an actor being on stage to like play to your audience, which is really cool.
A game where you're not there and it's, like always thinking about how can, even a board game, how can this board game engage everybody in a different way? Like, what is it, Bartle's taxonomy of gamers? How to
Yeah.
get for everybody.
Yeah.
I worked with Magic the Gathering for a while, and that was a really big thing is how can we get everybody engaged? And then it went back to gamers don't like the business part. I kind of find it fascinating because I would start looking at our budgets and say, we're spending so much on the narrative story arc, this percent of our budget, but only 15% of players are engaging it. And so you have to start thinking about how to arrange things a little better without being too, businessy,
Yeah.
but just kind
But
of.
how do you approach those things? I mean, are it sounds like because you're wanting to dig into how things work a lot, you kind of have that mindset already of like, this is what we're given. How do we either optimize it for player or for, both the business and the player or something like that? How do you begin that process when you're looking at whatever you're looking at, work or a board game or whatever? Like, what is what's the first thing you kind of reach to make that optimization happen?
I always start with like, what is the totally impractical vision? Like I said, our first image of Through the Keyhole was we're going to have actors and there was live events, and we're like, okay, it has to be scheduled during certain times. Do we have the capability to build it fast enough to meet this event deadline? And so it's like, okay, let's not do it that way. What does that change? And what does this change? Okay, now it doesn't feel as fun. What can we add back in that's fun? It's not reliant on these things. And then we came up with some things. We're like, okay, now what do we have the budget for? That's not reliant on those things, but still always seeking out that fun of how to make this engaging and make people want to play it again, even if it's not really possible. There's all sorts of great events that happen once because they're not really budgeted to survive. Haunted houses are a great example. They go for, well, they're repeatable, but they're seasonal. And so there's a natural end to it. And you really have to think about, okay, we have so many actors, how much do costumes cost? And rather than letting those things be obstacles, they're just things on a checklist that need to be addressed, if possible, addressed creatively. And sometimes they push you to new, exciting stuff.
So that it feels a lot when you were talking about this thing and then there's this thing. It feels very improv, like the yes and kind of methodology, right? And again, maybe that's just it. Is like, okay, we've got these constraints, yeah, and what about we go this way? Okay, well, we got these other constraints over here. So it is a little bit of that conversation, the back and forth of like how far can we stretch this to that, and you end up in a spot that feels good, satisfies requirements, all that kind of stuff. To whereas, stakeholders and players are all, happy enough, essentially.
Yeah, and I think you kind of have to start out with a balance of both. When stakeholders, especially the financial stakeholders, get too involved, like we have to make it, like go on forever, and it has to always be going up in revenues, and those things are important for a business. If you lay it on too heavy in the beginning, it'll never go anywhere. If you
Mm-hmm.
lay it on too heavy at any point, it will squelch it because games just don't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Can we put advertising in? Yeah, we could, but here's what that'll cost us.
Yeah. 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 I guess from a marketing perspective, in this case, you're essentially marketing for a book, and you've got a crowded marketplace in terms of that kind of thing. So how do you, I guess, what are some channels that you would use to market something like this to potential players?
For a local event built around a single location, you're not really marketing the book. That's more of a ticket. And
Okay.
so in this particular instance, the plan is to leverage those individual businesses. So get ads up because they're going to benefit from it. And so that gives you like 5 or 6 channels. Pre-make some social media things that they can just post really easily, part of this thing, or that are related to it somehow. It doesn't have to be too obvious. Working with, like tourism commissions, historical societies, libraries are always great. I was going to use the library a lot more, but they're not always open when it is. And I wasn't sure how librarians would feel about people trooping in and tearing through books, but
Being loud.
yeah, I didn't have enough involvement from them to feel comfortable about the buy-in. And maybe I was wrong, and they could have been like, "Why didn't you do this?" There are escape rooms in the library where you use library research and things to
Yeah,
in the library association.
that's cool.
So yeah, that would be a big channel, and then small businesses just going through, and then just your basic. And again, it has to be budgeted. Facebook ads, escape room societies.
Yeah.
Um,
It's fascinating. Like I feel like I've learned a ton of ways. Like it's funny because I do focus on escape rooms specifically, but all of this is relevant to escape rooms. But I feel like it's sort of scratching at something that I've been thinking about for a long time, which again, I kind of mentioned earlier, is that story aspect of it, the wider, grander scheme of an escape room in general. And I think the way that you're approaching a lot of those like decisions around the business or the production or whatever are, things that I don't hear a lot about. And I really appreciate you sharing, the journey that you've been on, for the last 3 years. I really do love the idea of exploring through puzzles like a location. I think that's really neat, and again, something I don't see everywhere. So I think that's a really cool idea. And I hope eventually you do get it to a point where it's out there and people are able to experience the town and stuff, because I think the model is really cool.
I've also started to think about how I can create a template and apply it to different locations using kind of the same techniques. Another project in itself.
Yeah, I was talking to someone earlier today, and he was adding something to his list and said, "I'm going to add this thing to my list that I'll never get done because I've got too many other things on that list that I'll never get done."
I have
So,
many. I don't even know where they all are.
yeah. Well, speaking of that, we're wrapping up here on time. I did want to say I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's taken us a couple attempts to get this off the ground. But I've learned a lot. Like I think this has been a really thoughtful and interesting conversation for me to hear from you. Is there Is there any way that people can connect with you or learn more about your project outside of this conversation?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the usual socials. LinkedIn is probably the best. I'm there the most. But yeah, there's only like three of me in the world with my name. So I'm the one in the US. I think the other two are in Europe. Um, so yeah, reach out. I'd love to get involved with more projects. Love to do game design just in general. I think it's a great way to apply all the weird puzzle pieces of me kind of fit in gaming.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much again. I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you soon.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.